Good evening, everybody. You notice I didn't walk up here with my Bible because I didn't want to panic my wife. She says, oh no, he's got his Bible. She would be in, I didn't want to do that to her. I thought I'd spare her, so I snuck it up here. But I think it's important that I say one thing very quickly. Let's see if I can turn this. So you remember Abraham, and to the Egyptians saying to Sarah, "You're my sister, right? Don't say anything. You're my sister. We don't want to die here tonight." And then just a few years later, he was faced with a similar situation with Abimelech. And once again, he said to Sarah, "Say you're my sister." Abimelech found all of this out, as you might remember. And he called Abraham in and he said this, "What have you done to us? How have I offended you that you have brought on me and my kingdom this great sin? You have done deeds to me that ought not be done." Then Abimelech said to Abraham, "What did you have in view that you have done this thing?" And Abraham said, "Because I thought surely the fear of God is not in this place, and they will kill me on account of my wife." See, the fear of God, Abraham knew this. We've known this from the beginning of all time, that the fear of God can dictate the conduct of a person. Abraham assumed that there was no fear of God in this place. I bring this up because how good would it be to have someone's conduct in the White House of the United States of America that wakes up every morning with the fear of God? And it's not a single issue that we should be voting on. It is the only issue that we should be voting on right now. We have seen godlessness in great measure in the White House for 7 years. I don't know about you. You all know how I feel. You listen to me. I'm sick of it. I don't want to see any more of it. And here's what I don't want to happen. Please don't call me. I know you're going to call the radio program and you're going to, please, listen, don't call me and say sometime down the road here, well, looks like another election. We're going to have to choose the best of two evils. Please don't let that happen. We don't have to let that happen. And if we let that happen, it's our own fault because we're not getting involved now. Do not let the polls dictate how conservative evangelicals ought to be voting, but more importantly, how conservative evangelicals where they ought to put their support. And yes, I'm even talking about our financial support, but I'm talking about getting out there and beating the bushes. We'd have a different country today if conservative evangelicals that were registered to vote, forget the ones that weren't registered, but that were registered to vote, if they'd have voted, all of them. As a matter of fact, if 11% more of them, 11% would have voted. And we heard all the excuses why they didn't vote. But it's about the primaries. Everything about America right now is about the primary. Those elections are about the primary. We will decide who gets the nomination. We have to decide who gets the nomination, not the polls, not the media, but we have to decide, and we have an opportunity to decide on a man that loves God, a man that loves Israel. We have that opportunity. Let's make the change in the polls. How many of you remember my rants about Eric Cantor? He wasn't a friend of mine. You all know that. I had Republican strategists from Virginia just ripping me. And I hate to use the word Republican and strategist in the same sentence because I don't think we have any. But, I mean, just giving me a hard time about it. But look what Dave Bratt did. Because of all of you, because of people. I had people calling me saying, I never voted in a primary in my life until now. And now you did. We have a chance. Abraham knew how important it was to have the fear of God and understood that the conduct is going to be about that person's heart and waking up every morning with the fear of God. Folks, we have that opportunity. We need to get busy right now. Not just in the state of Virginia. That's what we're talking about right now, but across this country. Conservative evangelicals have to come out in great force. We have a voting bloc that is an unbelievable voting bloc. We can win every election that we want if we would all get motivated. And I'm just going to leave you with this last thing, and then we'll get started. And Governor Huckabee is going to say a few things, and we're going to ask a few questions. But a lot of us in this room, and a lot of people we know, believe with our heart that the Word of God is the inerrant Word of God, right? I came to the Lord late in life. You all know my story. Many of you know my story. I was one of the scumbags on Wall Street that everybody talks about. But listen, if we believe that, that means we believe in Romans chapter 13 where it says that all authority is ordained of God, right? We've got to believe that. We believe in from cover to cover, right? It is lunacy to believe, just think about this rationally, that God would ordain something and then ask his people to stay out of what he's ordained. That's not even logical. If we are Bible-believing Christians, we need to take that to heart, and we need to be involved in what God has ordained, all things that God has ordained. And Governor Mike Huckabee, you know how I feel about insiders and outsiders. He's about as an outsider as he can get. He has not been a part of Washington, D.C. He's been a man who knows how to run something. He's actually had to be an executive, had to run the state of Arkansas, and did an unbelievable job. And listen, media, Washington, he's not their favorite guy. He's not an insider. And he's what we need for America. Make sure we sign that petition. Make sure you encourage everybody else to do the same. We need to get involved, folks. And we need to fix the economy. We need to fix a lot of things. We need to build our relationships with Israel, and I'll let Governor talk about that. So let me ask Governor Huckabee to come up. Thank you for coming out tonight. We sure do appreciate it.
First of all, I want to say what a delight it is to be here to see this kind of incredible gathering on a Friday night. I've heard me speak before, and I would not have given up a Friday night to come hear me. So I am very grateful, and I want to say thanks to Dan for his introduction. He did scare me a little bit when he got that great big Bible out. I thought, you know, Dan, many of us have discovered the iPhone. You can put the Old and the New Testament all on there. In fact, I've got about 20 different versions all on there. Isn't it amazing what a smartphone can do? One thing it hasn't been able to do, though, is to completely keep me from hobbling a little bit. If you notice that I'm maybe limping, let me explain. I had knee surgery last Wednesday. And, oh, that was a very sympathetic awe. That's more than I got from my wife. I'm really, I should have taken you guys to the surgery center with me. It was to remove a bone chip from my knee, not a chip off my shoulder. I just want to make sure you understand there was a difference. And frankly, I'm doing, I think, remarkably well. And, I've hobbled around with a cane for a few days, try to get rid of it, have to use it occasionally with stairs and so on, but I'm really doing well. But I do still have a little bit of the effect of that until the knee gets a little stronger. And so I just want you to know, if you see me limping, it is not unlike it was in the day of Jacob. Remember when Jacob had that wrestling match with the angel? And he went away and God touched him. And for the rest of his life, he walked with a limp. Well, I've not wrestled with God just yet, but I have wrestled with Donald Trump, and I am limping just a little bit, so could be. Tonight, we're going to have a very good time. Most of the evening is going to be spent with Dan asking questions and then opening up to those of you here in the audience. This is going to be more of an interview and town hall format rather than a speech. And I really hope that you will ask the questions that are on your heart. I want to say thanks to the church for giving us the privilege of being here in this congregation. And I also want to protect this wonderful pastor, Pastor Mark, and his congregation. They are giving us the facilities. This is not an endorsement that the church is making of my candidacy, the Republican Party, or anything else. I'm endorsing them. They're not endorsing me. We are using their facility, so I will be political tonight, but it is not because that is any indication of the way this church or its pastor or anyone else is feeling or sentiment. And I just want to make sure that nobody says, I can't believe that pastor just went out there and turned that thing over to a presidential candidate. Well, I think it's a wonderful thing that of all the places that we should come and talk about the future of our country, I can't think of any forum that would be more appropriate than our community of faith. And tonight, I know that many are here because of the Hope for Israel emphasis, and what a marvelous way that this church has created a ministry not only to show support for Israel, but to bring bridges of friendship to those throughout the community who recognize that we have really not just a political reason for having a partnership with Israel. I think we certainly have that. We have a unique relationship with the nation of Israel. That relationship is not just organizational. I like to say that it is organic, in that our countries, the United States and Israel, are both very much akin in that they were created by people who were looking for liberty and for freedom and an escape from tyranny. And in each case, there is no explanation for the very existence of either of these two nations apart from the providence of Almighty God Himself. There is no explanation for either of these countries apart from that. My own personal relationship to Israel started some 42 years ago in 1973, summer of that year. I was 17, a month away from my 18th birthday, and I made my first trip to Israel. That summer, I went all over the Middle East, to Syria, to Lebanon, to Jordan, to Turkey, places I wouldn't go now. But I was 17. You'll do a lot of dumb things when you're 17. A friend of mine wanted to go, and he ended up being my college roommate. He was from a very wealthy family. His dad owned an oil company. My dad never finished high school. I was dirt poor. He was quite wealthy. It was truly the prince and the pauper. But he wanted to go, and his dad said, I'm not going to let you go over there by yourself, but I'll tell you what, if Mike Huckabee will go with you, I'll pay his way along with yours. And that's how I got to go. And it was a remarkable opportunity for me, who had never been very far from home and never thought I would be very far from home, to be able to go halfway around the world. And of course, we didn't know that it was 2 months just before the Yom Kippur War. We had no idea how tense things were then, but it didn't feel tense. But something happened when I went to Israel. I found extraordinary beauty in Beirut and Baalbek. I was stunned by the extraordinary amphitheaters of Ephesus in Turkey. I was thrilled to stand on Mount Nebo in Jordan and look over into the Promised Land. There were many things that I saw that were magnificent. But there was something about it when I did something that Moses didn't get to do. He looked into the land, but he never got to go. I did. And when I got to Israel, it was as if I was in a place, though I'd never been there before, that I totally felt at home. That was 1973, and Israel was a sleepy little country, 25 years old in its newest form. Struggling economy. Most of its people lived on the kibbutzim. Much of their economy was tied around a little bit of tourism and selling some oranges. It was a very, very tough time for them. They were under siege constantly by the people who surrounded them and wanted to destroy them and annihilate them. But what I saw in the Israeli people in 1973, I felt like I was looking at the American spirit of the early pioneers who came looking for freedom, for liberty for their families, for religious liberty, and who were willing to sacrifice their very blood to make sure that their children never lived in tyranny again. And I found myself captivated by this extraordinary spirit that was very evident throughout Israel. But I also recall that the scripture makes very clear that even when we don't keep our promises to God, God keeps his promises always to us. We cannot say that we will never leave or forsake him, but he has said and has kept his word that he will never leave or forsake us. And the truth of the scripture is absolutely, without any equivocation, trustworthy. And when the Bible says in Genesis chapter 12, verse 3, those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be cursed. You see, I believe that. I believe that because how could I not believe that and then believe any other promise in the Bible? And so tonight, I want you to understand that I believe I can make a strong political case, a strong, even military national security case for a very, very strong alliance with Israel and the United States. And I'm sure we'll get into that in the course of the evening. But I also want you to know that for many of us, there is also a deeply held spiritual reason for us to believe that this alliance is more than just a geopolitical convenience. It is a biblical necessity for us to recognize that if we, as an American nation, do not respect God's promise to the people of Israel, then how are we going to say, God bless America? Because we will have forfeited that prayer in our inventory. I've taken thousands of people to Israel. I've been there dozens and dozens of times over the past 42 years. I've been there twice this year, 3 times last year. One of the times last year was just after Naftali Frankel, one of the 3 young Israeli teens, was murdered by Palestinian thugs on his way home from school. I landed at the Ben Gurion airport and drove immediately to the home of his mother and father. And I spent an evening with them in their home. And I talked with them. This was just before they even found the bodies of their children. They were still hoping at that time that they would find him alive. And it was 2 days later when they found his body. But as I talked to this amazing mother, whose son, by the way, was an American citizen. So an American gets killed in Israel. He never gets a single word, not anything, from our State Department or from the White House. And one of the reasons I went was to say, I cannot speak for the government of my country, but I believe I can speak for millions of Christians in my country to let you know that we stand with you, we pray for you, and we are not forgetting what happened to your son. We are here with you. Two months later, in August of that year, my wife and I went back to Israel. We wanted to go and show our support because, once again, our own government had done something amazingly foolish. They had closed American flights to Ben Gurion Airport, even though it is the safest airport in the world. And we went there. We took a behind-the-scenes security tour of Ben Gurion, things most people never get to see. The director of the airport showed us an extraordinary level of security. We also went to the southernmost air base and spent a day in briefings with the Israeli IDF pilots who flew the missions into Gaza. We were there as rockets were being fired from Hamas into Israel. I watched and observed once again, even though the world news media would never give credit to Israel for this, but while Hamas was putting children and women in front of their targets, the Israelis were putting their military in front of their women and children and doing everything to protect innocent civilians. But not only were they protecting their own civilians, they were protecting the civilians of Gaza in ways that were stunning. Even the United States does not go to such great lengths to protect and preserve civilian targets as does the Israelis. For this, they get zero credit and no appreciation. I have seen with my own eyes what they do to drop pamphlets, to call everyone's cell phone who lives in Gaza, who is in the vicinity of when a bomb is supposed to be dropped. Then drones fly over and give live video to see how many people come out of that building before the bombs are dropped. And even then, the pilots are only given the go command when they are relatively sure that there are no civilian targets left in that building that they were about to bomb, after sending cell phones, leaflets, radio broadcasts, and telling them, get out of this building, we're about to bomb it. No other nation on earth takes that level of precaution to try to protect innocent life. For that, they are vilified and hated. Today, one thing I find is that the same enemy that wants to destroy them wants to destroy us. Radical Islamic Jihad. One of the things that my wife and I did when we were there last August, we took a group of American wounded warriors who had been injured in Afghanistan and Iraq, and we escorted them to the largest military hospital where Israeli soldiers and IDF members were being treated for everything from traumatic brain injury to the loss of limb, to being hit by IEDs and bullets. I must tell you, there were many times when I just stood and wiped tears from my eyes as I introduced an American wounded warrior to an Israeli soldier, and the bond that they had was because they knew one thing. Even though there was, in many cases, as much as a generation apart, many of these IDF soldiers were 18, 19-year-olds. They were just kids. Many of our American servicemen were in their 40s, some in their 50s. But the one thing they had in common, they knew who their enemy was. And they both understood that each of them suffered wounds because they were fighting Islamic Jihad. And they knew that if they didn't ultimately win that battle, then it wouldn't just be them in the hospital or in the morgue. It would be every one of their children and their grandchildren. And tonight we face a real serious danger in this country. And I believe it is required of us to understand the danger we face and to be willing not just to fight it, but to defeat it and destroy it and to put it out of our misery. And with that, Dan, we will begin our conversation.
Well, my first question was about the lack of political will, it seems, in Washington to expand our relationship with Israel, and it just is gone. And I was going to ask you, as president, how would you begin to instill that will and be able to go before Congress to help them understand how important it is?
Dan, until this administration, the relationship of the United States and Israel was so solid that it really didn't matter whether it was a Democrat or a Republican administration or a Democrat or Republican Congress. We understood who our friends were, we understood who our enemies were. It is only in the past 7 years that there's been such a level of confusion. And I'm convinced that with the right leadership, we will once again see a bipartisan support for our friends in Israel. A recognition of this strategic relationship, the need to share military intelligence, the need to share a common defense against their assaults, and a common intent to go after those who have already declared enmity against them and us. And nobody has ever declared enmity against Israel that didn't also declare enmity against the United States. Most of all, the Iranians. The deal with the Iranians is the most absolutely inexplicable decision any U.S. president has made. And I don't understand, and I will say this, Please help me understand why 3 Republicans running for president voted for the Corker bill that made it easier for President Obama to go into that relationship rather than treat it like it should have been, which was a treaty requiring a supermajority to pass it. The Corker bill, and I don't want to get into the weeds of how government works, but the bill that all of the Republicans pushed and voted for made it so that it took a supermajority to stop the Iranian deal. Only one person in the entire United States Senate voted against it. The vote was 99 to 1. And the one lone senator was Tom Cotton from my home state of Arkansas. This makes no sense, but we must get out of that agreement. We must again recognize Iran has no interest whatsoever in keeping an agreement that it's made, because in 36 years it's never kept one. The one thing I do believe that they will do is that given enough capacity, they will build a nuclear device, and they will use it first against Israel and then against the United States. They have vowed they will do this. Even as we negotiated, we never even demanded that the Washington Post reporter, who today spends his 501st day in captivity in Iran, we never demanded that he be released, nor did we demand that Saeed Abedini, the American pastor who is still being held under the kidnapping of the Iranian government, we never demanded his release. We should never have even gone into the room to negotiate with these savages unless they had put those people on an airplane from Tehran back to the United States.
Speak as President Huckabee on giving up our military might, our national security, to political correctness and a twisted ideology. Speak to how we restore that, how we get on that, change that dramatically.
Dan, the morale in our military has never been lower. Among our servicemen and women, there is a great sense of discouragement because they did not sign up to be a part of a special club to try out social experiments to appease those who push for political correctness. These are people who signed up to defend the United States of America and to keep us safe and to keep us free. And under this administration, there has been such a focus upon making sure that we had same-sex relationships that were celebrated in the military, that we push for a complete inclusion and even the taxpayer-funded payment of transgender surgery for service persons who believe that they are another gender. I cannot imagine why we would spend a dime changing the gender of someone in the military when we have vets coming back without arms and legs that are waiting months in a VA facility. That is inexcusable. So let me be very, very clear. The purpose of the military, and I'm going to say this in a very blunt way, and I hope this is not offensive, but if it is, and so be it. I'm used to that. The purpose of the military is not to cook meals, build schools, make nice shelters, and do the work of the Peace Corps. The purpose of the United States military is to kill people and break things and to create the most awesome, feared force on the face of the earth so that even if our enemies do not like us, they doggone sure will respect us. And I don't consider myself a hawk, and I certainly don't consider myself a warmonger, but I do consider myself an American who believes that the best way to keep your children and your grandchildren out of a war is to have a military so strong, so robust, so well equipped, so well trained, so well prepared, and so ready that nobody on earth would be stupid enough to engage them in a battle because they would know what the outcome of that battle would be before they ever started it.
Governor, Islamic terrorism becoming a bigger and bigger global threat, as we see every day. 40% of immigrants in this country have overstayed their visas. We don't know where they are or what they're doing. Illegals and likely terrorists pouring across our borders. What would be President Huckabee's solution?
Well, Dan, first of all, a country that doesn't have borders is not a country. We don't have a border that's secure because we just want to keep people out because we're selfish. We have a border because we want to make sure that the people who are coming in to join us to make America a better country on earth. And they recognize the extraordinary opportunities that exist here. We don't want to keep people out. But if they come, it's not a matter of how many are coming, it's why they're coming. I want to know not so much how many are in your family. I want to know, what are you coming to America for? If you're coming because you see this as a place that you can embrace our Constitution, embrace our way of life and way of government, you want to learn the language so that you can fit in and be part of who we are. You want to work hard. You want to accept your part of the responsibility to pull the wagon, make the bread. If that's what you want to do because you see this as a better place for your children to grow up and your great-grandchildren to one day enjoy the legacy that you help provide for them, you're going to fit in beautifully here. But if you come here because you want somehow for us to provide free food, free medical care, free education, and that you can push to and hear all the instructions in your own language, then maybe it's not a good time for you because we're kind of full up and we owe $20 trillion right now, and we just don't have the room. So I believe that we could secure our border in less than a year. And I commit to you that if I'm president, we'll do it. And I know that sounds presumptuous, and so let me explain why I'm so confident that it can be done. 73 years ago, the United States built a road between British Columbia and Alaska. Now, it was a 1,700-mile road 73 years ago with the technology that we had to build and engineer things then. Built in the Arctic climate between British Columbia and Alaska. And that 1,700-mile road was built in less than a year. I am confident that we can build a secure border across the southern part of this United States, and we can do it in less than a year. And one way I would absolutely insist and make sure that it got done is that I would deploy the Director of Homeland Security and his family to Laredo, Texas, and tell them, this is your workstation until that border is secure.
I don't think Donald Trump built that road, did he? Anyway, so now we get into it. As an economist, I've been waiting to ask some economic questions, near and dear to my heart. One of the things that I love is, by the way, we had an interview on the radio, and you'll notice that on my YouTube, the piece that had the most views was the piece that we talked about the strength of our military. That's how important it is to us. As a former veteran of Vietnam era, I love the military. I loved our military then, and when I see the morale today compared to what it is and what we have done to the military, it's very sad. So I appreciate that. I love fair tax. I love the idea of a fair tax. From me, I'm a number cruncher, so I go through all the numbers. I know a 10% flat tax cannot work. It's impossible. I have talked about a flat tax. I've talked about it at a minimum of 17%. That's the only way it would possibly work. That's assuming a huge amount of cuts in the federal government, and I don't believe just that we ought to be cutting our military to achieve any of those cuts. So I love the fair tax. My issue with it is, my only issue with it is, I don't believe there's a will in Washington, even amongst a Republican Congress, to see that happen. How do you feel about getting that done?
Well, the fair tax will never get done unless we elect a president who believes in it, who is willing to sell it to the American people, explain it to the American people, and also lead it through Congress. People forget the power of the executive branch. I know a little about it, having governed a state like Arkansas for 10 and a half years, where 90% of my legislature were Democrats. 90%. It was the most lopsided legislature in the country, more than Massachusetts, Maine, Vermont, Oregon, California, New Jersey, New York. So when people tell me we'll never get that through, everything I got through a legislature in Arkansas, there was no way that should have happened because the sheer partisan numbers meant I should have lost every battle. I got 90% of every legislation I wanted through that assembly. How? I learned how to govern, that's how. It's building relationships, and it's not making it all about yourself. You see, I think servant leadership, the model that we get from Jesus, is how you lead. And if you elevate other people and give them and empower them to help take the ideas and share the victories of them, you're more likely to get some people who will help you. I know this because I saw it done time and again. Sometimes it's simple things. Politics is like running a business. It's like being in a marriage in some ways. The best political scientists probably of our lifetime will surprise you. It's the rock group, the Rolling Stones. Remember their song, "You Can't Always Get What You Want"? There's a lot of wisdom in that. And in politics, you're not going to get everything you want. The reason Washington is so dysfunctional is you've got people who say, all or nothing, now or never. And they get nothing, and they get it forever. If we're going to pass the fair tax, it'll only happen if a president leads it. We have currently 80 different members of Congress who are sponsoring the fair tax bill. So at least there's a beginning point. There's a process. I've testified on Capitol Hill for the fair tax before. I sat there before Charlie Rangel. That was a lot of fun. His idea of a fair tax is you pay, he doesn't. That's his fair tax. But the fact is, a president has an extraordinary power of the bully pulpit. And I'll give you an example to tell you how drastically a difference a president can make. Just 3.5 years ago, President Obama's view on same-sex marriage was the same as mine. He said he believed it was the biblical model, that it was one man, one woman, and that was God's way, and it was a biblical way. And 3.5 years ago, that's what he said he believed, that's what Hillary said she believed. Somewhere along in 2012, when he started getting pressure from his donors, he suddenly had an epiphany, and he decided he was for same-sex marriage, leading me to say there's only one of 3 reasons that he could have had that 180-degree turn. Number one, he was lying in 2008 when he told Pastor Rick Warren, my old seminary classmate, when he told Rick Warren that he was for biblical marriage. Number two, he was lying then when he said he was now for it. Or number 3, God rewrote the Bible and he was the only one who got the new version. I'm pretty sure that didn't have anything to do with it. Now here's what I want you to remember. In the short time between the time that the President of the United States started calling people and congratulating them on their sexual identity and sexual preference, whether because they were in the NBA or the NFL, and he celebrated same-sex marriage and made it an important part of his administration's agenda. Just this past June, we had a Supreme Court decision, which I believe was illegal and unconstitutional, but we'll get into that later. But we had a decision, and most of the major corporations of America, brands that you have bought for your whole life, immediately put rainbows up on their website celebrating same-sex marriage. And the White House was lit in rainbow colors that very night. The point I'm making is this. We would not be where we are in that decision had a president not given it the cultural kind of acceptance and the authenticity and the authenticating that he did. So if a president can do that, I'm convinced that a president who is persuasive can not only talk to members of Congress, but can explain to the American people that this is how we bring manufacturing jobs back. This is how we get capital back. This is also how we deal with one of the major issues of immigration, because we take the economic advantage of illegal immigration out of the equation, which, by the way, it's there. A quick little thing. I don't mean to go off on this, but I kind of opened that door and I've got to go through it now. If I hire Dan and he's an illegal and I pay him $8 an hour when I would have had to have paid an American citizen $12 an hour, I've underpaid Dan, I've exploited his labor, and we should be angry that he's being exploited. But the fact is, Dan will actually have more take-home money at $8 an hour than the American will at $12, because we're going to tax the American on income, Social Security, and Medicare. His payroll tax and his income tax will mean that he actually gets more money at $8 an hour than the American at $12. But here's the other side of this that I never hear anybody else talk about. The employer not only underpays Dan and has an advantage from that transaction, but because Dan's an illegal, the employer doesn't pay his portion of the payroll tax, the additional 7.5%. Now he's getting a double advantage for hiring illegals. Why is it that the Republicans don't want to fix the immigration issue? Why is it that the Republicans listen to big business and they won't even take on this issue? I tell you why. They're making a lot of money off of it, and the donors are telling them not to. Well, it's time for us to say that, look, we want Americans to be treated at least as well as the people who snuck into this country. We're not against them, but we're for Americans to be paid a decent wage. The fair tax fixes that.
It does. And by the way, what the governor is talking about is not just that he's governed. He's talking about leadership. All those things happens through leadership that we're so lacking in this country. If president, would you be able, what do you think about reducing, I was going to go to entitlements, I'm going to get to that. Regulatory burden, can you make significant changes in entitlement programs, the third rail of politics, which I hesitate to think how we navigate that through Congress. So I'd like to hear about that. And not touching, not counting, not having an impact on defense in doing this. Can we get to a place where we could expect a Ronald Reagan-like reduction in the size of our government? At the very same time, we are incorporating the fair tax. Now, you know and I know that would solve a lot of woes, and it would solve a lot of the issues with entitlement programs. I don't believe that entitlement programs are impossible to fix or hard to fix. I think Social Security is probably the easiest thing in the world to fix. I think we can fix it very simply, but there's no will to do it.
Well, one of the reasons that these programs are in trouble is because we keep stealing from them.
Right.
The Social Security program is not the problem. The problem is Washington has taken its hands, stuck it in the cookie jar, and they took your money. Let me make real clear my position. Social Security is not an entitlement. It's an earned benefit that you paid for. It is not a welfare program. If you paid into Social Security, you were never asked if it was okay or did you want to. It was involuntarily lifted out of your paycheck. And every time you got a paycheck, there was a big chunk of it that was taken out for Social Security and Medicare. Now, that was your money. The government didn't ask you for it. They just took it, and they said, don't worry, because when you get of retirement age, it'll be there for you. Look, Bernie Madoff is in prison today, as he should be, but he is in prison for doing something far less nefarious than what the government has done with your Social Security money for this reason. At least Bernie Madoff's victims chose to give their money to Bernie Madoff. Maybe it was foolish on their part, but they thought it was a good idea, but they made it was a voluntary decision to give him their money for investment. The government never asked you. They just took it. And now, having stolen it from you for, let's say if you started work at 14 and you retired 65, that's 51 years that you have worked and put into the system. If you have paid in for 51 years and now they say, by the way, we want to change the rules. We're going to make you work an extra 10 years, or we're going to means test you, and we're going to decide you've made too much money. And because you've done well with your life and made money, we're going to just not let you have any of the money that you have put in. If your bank did that, they'd go out of business. The FDIC would go after them. The SEC would go after them. And the executives of the bank would be in prison. I just want to make sure you understand that if we had 4% economic growth in this country, we don't have a problem with Social Security or Medicare. We have a problem because we have an anemic economic growth. We're not growing the economy. Growing the economy fixes most of the economic issues. We start paying down the national debt. We have a strong military. And Social Security and Medicare are fully funded. I don't know why many of my fellow Republican presidential candidates keep talking about wanting to reduce benefits, add to the age, means test Social Security. I'm thinking the Republican way is not to figure out how to take people's money from them. The Republican way is to talk about how to build a robust economy so that people's money is actually worth something again, and we have jobs again, and America keeps its promises again. And that's what I think we should be doing with Social Security. Real quickly on Medicare, it's a simple thing. It's simple. It's complex to get it, but the big picture is simple. We don't have a health care problem in America. We have a health problem, not a health care problem. 85% of all the cost of Medicare is chronic disease. We've got a chronic disease epidemic. Now, what would happen if the next president combined the vision of getting rid of polio that I saw happen in my lifetime in the 50s with the same vision that President Kennedy said regarding the space program, that we'd put a man on the moon and bring him back? And we would say that within 10 years, we're going to find a cure to cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, and heart disease. If we eliminated the threat of those 4 diseases and essentially took care of them like we did polio, which, by the way, we didn't spend a dime on polio in this country last year, and since the 1950s, we've saved hundreds of billions of dollars in iron lungs and leg braces because we don't have polio to take care of. What would happen if we did that with cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and Alzheimer's? Now, the fact is, everybody in this room, if I ask, have any of you have been touched by one of these 4 diseases? And by that I mean either you personally, your husband or wife, your son, your daughter, your mother, your father, or your closest friend. How many of you have been touched by at least one of those 4 things? I think it's 100%, best I can tell. Some of us, like me, have been touched by all 4 within that very small circle of people. If that was no longer a threat, we don't just transform the healthcare system, Dan, we transform the economy of America. We forget the benefits of the space program to our everyday lives. Whether it's that computer that's sitting over there, my smartphone, the GPS that told you how to get here, hopefully will tell you how to get home. Of course, if you don't know how to get home, you probably shouldn't be here. I just throw that out there. Your flat screen television, drone aircraft. I mean, I could, your digital watch, your microwave oven, your MRI. Folks, the space program has given us so many things that we don't even stop to appreciate. We have had so much better return from our investment on the space program than most people understand. Imagine if we took on those 4 diseases and we found cures for them, instead of just figuring out how for the next 100 years to spend more and more and more and more money on treating them when they're catastrophic. Think of what it does if we cure them and people don't have them anymore. That would transform this country. And think about the pain in your life with your loved ones. We buried my mother-in-law last year after a 10-year battle with Alzheimer's. It's a horrible thing to deal with, and some of you have been through it. The physical, emotional, and spiritual cost of going through that horrible process would be reason enough to say, let's cure this. If we miss, we may find cures to a dozen other diseases in the process. But I'm confident that America is still a country, when we put our minds to do something, as surely as we went to the moon in fact, we could find cures to these dreaded, deadly diseases, and it would be transformational.
Let's take a couple questions. I know the governor's got a very busy schedule. As a matter of fact, tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock, he'll be on Fox and Friends. So who's got a question? Nobody has a question? Wow, did we do a good job?
One back here.
Okay.
Got a bunch of them.
Governor, we've been told by presidents for the last umpteen years, I'm gonna balance the budget in 10 years. He doesn't have to keep that promise, because he's never gonna serve the full 10 years, and the next administration comes in, makes the same promise. How are you gonna do it different? Can you balance the budget in 1 year, 4 years? Can you do it while you're in office?
I think if we passed the fair tax, we would balance the budget in less than my term in office. And I also believe that one of the reasons that you should elect a governor is because governors have actually balanced budgets. Senators never have. And I'm just being blunt. We've done it. That's what I did 10 and a half years. I never had a budget that wasn't in balance. I also believe we are not going to get a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution, which I think we ought to have. And the best way to do that is to invoke an Article 5 of our Constitution, which was allow a convention of the states. If you've read Mark Levin's book or heard Michael Farris talk about this, we could have term limits for Congress, term limits for the courts, and a balanced budget amendment. But it will never happen if we depend on Congress to get it done. We're going to have to turn it over to the states and to the people, and I'm convinced we could. And one thing that would help us accelerate that, put some shame before Congress, and pass legislation that if they did not balance the budget, they would take a 25% pay cut. It would make a difference.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Governor Huckabee, it sounds like you are a strong advocate for Israel, which I appreciate. Would you, as president, consider moving the embassy to Israel's capital?
Yes, sir. I know that every president has always said he will do it, and he never does. And then here's the excuse. Well, we're afraid it would be provocative. We're afraid it would cause people to hate Israel. Folks, the enemies already hate Israel. I mean, it's like a friend of mine who was witnessing to a guy, and he was pretty straightforward with him, trying to bring him to Christ. And one of his buddies said, "Man, I think you're too hard. You're gonna run him away. You're gonna turn him away." He said, "Turn him away from what? He's already headed to hell. I'm trying to get him to heaven, man. I mean, how much more danger can he be in?" My point in that is not to make the joke of it, but to tell you that we have a moral obligation to recognize that if Israel declares Jerusalem to be their capital, and they do, then we as a country, if they're really our friend and really our ally, then shouldn't we honor the capital that they choose? After all, they honor the capital we choose. And Israel is in a unique place. I believe that you'll never hear me say the term West Bank. There is no such thing. It is Judea and Samaria. You will never hear out of my lips that Israel has occupied territory. The only thing they occupy is the land that God gave them title deed to. And you will never hear me suggest that it would be smart for Israel to have a divided Jerusalem, because there's no reason for that, and it would be a disaster internationally. You will never hear me encourage Israel to give up land for peace, because they've done it before, and they got zero peace. In fact, they got more conflict, and they ended up losing the land. What they need to do is to say, look, this is our land. If you want to live here with us, we'll figure this out. But if you don't want to recognize our existence to own this land and to govern it, then we'll look for another place for you to go, but it won't be here, because we're not going anywhere. We have a right to this land. We've had it for thousands of years, and this is our birthright property, and we plan to stay, and the United States should stand next to them and say, and we'll see to it that nobody takes it from them.
Hello, Governor Huckabee. If my memory serves me correct, you were a governor, so you probably are aware of the 10th Amendment and its reserved power for the states. So my question revolves around the prohibition of marijuana.
I'm sorry, the what?
Prohibition of marijuana.
Okay, go ahead.
If you do support the prohibition, wouldn't that be a violation of the 10th Amendment and the Commerce Clause?
Well, my feeling is Colorado is a state that's testing out, as is Washington State, whether recreational marijuana is a great idea. I've surprised some people. I said, look, if somebody thinks this is a brilliant idea and the citizens of that state declare that they want that, then let's let them road test that. And in 5 or 10 years, if it's the greatest thing that ever happened and people are going to work with more vigor, and they're showing up early and staying late, and the productivity rate is higher, and people's test scores are up, and crime is down. I'm not being facetious. I'm just saying, honestly, let's evaluate it. Let's give people a chance. I could be wrong. So if Colorado and Washington State do this and it works out beautifully, then I think other states can say, hey, there's no harm. But I don't think it's the federal government's role to go out and insist that a state do something. I do believe in the 10th Amendment. I do believe that the states are the laboratories of government and should experiment. One of the reasons Obamacare is a failure is because they put it on all 50 states. What should have been done was pick out 7 or 8, 10 states that wanted to do it and thought it was a brilliant idea, road test it in those states, give it 5, 6 years, and if it's as great as Nancy Pelosi said it was, having never even read it, then everybody would have been jumping on it to do it. And if it turned out to be a disaster, you would not have made a 50-state mistake. So I'm okay if Colorado thinks this is great. Let's just go check back in with them in a few years and look and see how it's working out for them. As Dr. Phil would say, how's that working out for you? And if it's working out great, leave them alone. If it's not, then maybe they'll repeal their law or whatever.
Thank you for not asking me that question. I really appreciate it.
All right, so this is the last one, I'm told. So,
thank you for taking my question. Regarding the fair tax,
yes.
it's my understanding that if we incorporate the fair tax, and we leave the 16th Amendment still active, that at some point in the future, we could end up both with the fair tax and the income tax. So is that part of your plan to repeal the 16th Amendment for income taxes so that the fair tax can come in and then not be, and then after, your 8 years in office, some other president come in and reinstitute the income tax? That and what are you going to do with all the burdensome regulations that the EPA is putting out for all of our energy? Because we can be the most energy independent country on the face of the earth,
yes,
if we just untie our hands and maybe stand on both feet instead of on one foot.
Well, first of all, we should repeal the 16th Amendment because that puts the nails in the coffin of the IRS and of the income tax, and it should be done that way. And so a part of implementing the fair tax should be the repeal of the 16th Amendment. But if you hear anybody else tell you they're going to get rid of the IRS, but they're not going to do the fair tax, they're not telling you the truth. Because every other tax plan that I have heard, even flat taxes, are still based on taxing income, which means you have to report your income to the federal government. That requires the IRS to stay in business. With the fair tax, we really do put this criminal enterprise, rogue agency, for once and all, out of business. And it should be out of business. As for the EPA, I could not agree more. I think one of the failures of our government is we have allowed too many federal bureaucracies to headquarter in Washington, where people have no clue what they're even regulating. There are people in Washington regulating farms in places like Arkansas and Iowa who've never been to a farm. They wouldn't know a mud puddle from the Pacific Ocean, but they think they can regulate wetlands. The farmers who own and operate that land and have for 6 generations have a whole lot more vested interest in clean water, good soil, fresh air than anybody who's 1,000 miles from them who have no idea how to grow seed and make it into a crop. The way to get energy independence is to explore and then become the world's largest exporter of energy in the world. We do 3 things when that happens. Number one, we put millions of Americans to work, and we build a robust economy off of the coal, oil, gas, biofuels, nuclear, wind, solar, everything we can find that we can produce, because we will export energy. The second thing it does, it changes the balance of power. Right now, the reason that Russia, the Iranians, and the Saudis have any capacity to fund terrorism and nefarious deeds is because they got energy money. If we take the markets of Europe, Africa, and Asia away from them and sell energy to those markets instead of those 3 folks, we start getting that prosperity, and we bankrupt them and take their capacity to fund terrorism right out from under them. The third thing it does, it brings energy prices dramatically and historically low for Americans. Now, here's what that does. If you're a single mom and you're driving kids and dropping them off at daycare and then going to work and coming back and picking them up, and every day you're spending money on fuel, if we can get your gasoline from $3 a gallon down to less than $1 a gallon, we just gave you the biggest pay raise you ever had. And that lady in South Arkansas who's 84 years old on a hot summer 105-degree day, and we have them in South Arkansas, when we get electricity rates down because we are now robust in our supply and capacity for energy, she can turn her air conditioning on at 72 and enjoy a healthy day instead of sweltering in a very dangerous situation when it's 105 outside and she can't afford to turn even so much as her fan on, much less her air conditioner. I kind of like that picture of America a whole lot more than President Obama's picture of America, where we ride bicycles and he flies Air Force One. I don't like his view of America that says that we should apologize for our energy success. I think we ought to tell the world, you guys, we found energy, and what we've done with it is we've made life better for every person on this earth. People can go places they've never gone. They can do things they could never do. We can produce more than we've ever produced, and we can ship it all over the world. Rather than curse the energy we have, we should bless God that we've been given it and thank Him that under our feet are greater levels of resources than the Saudis have. And we should never think that the greatest threat we face is climate change. Because I will tell you this, that with all due respect to the president, a beheading is much worse than a sunburn. I hope the president will understand that. Thank you very much. God bless you.